What if the most qualified person to save a child wasn't a doctor, wasn't a therapist, wasn't anyone you'd ever expect, but a quiet man pushing a mop? What if healing didn't begin in a clinic, but with a single breath, a shimmering bubble, and the courage to see what others ignored? In a towering glass building filled with prestige, data, and pride, a little girl broke down and none of the experts could help. But one man did. He wasn't called into the boardroom. He wasn't listed on the payroll. And yet, in one quiet moment, he changed everything, not just for a child in crisis, but for a world that had forgotten how to truly listen. This isn't a story about a janitor. It's a story about the power of being seen, about how silence can be sacred, and how sometimes the revolution begins not with a roar, but with a whisper and a bubble. What if the person most equipped to save your child wasn't wearing a white coat or carrying a clipboard, but instead pushing a mop through the polished halls of a billion-dollar corporation? What if the expert you'd spent years and millions searching for had been right in front of you the whole time, but you didn't see him because you never looked? In a world obsessed with resins, fees, and credentials framed on mahogany walls, one man quietly shattered everything we thought we knew about authority, understanding, and healing, not with a degree, but with a bottle of soap and a few bubbles. His name was Elijah Brooks, 42 years old, black, night janitor at Halston Pharmaceuticals World Headquarters. He moved like someone who knew how to disappear his sneakers soft on Italian marble, his gaze lowered out of habit, not humility. Most people didn't speak to him. Fewer still remembered his name. But Elijah noticed everything. He always had. And on that particular Tuesday morning, he noticed a child in crisis before anyone else even knew what they were looking at. The girl's name was Lily Chen-Moreno, 6 years old. Blonde hair, pale skin, eyes as blue as cracked porcelain. She sat curled on the floor of the massive corporate lobby, rocking herself with small, rigid movements. Her fingers clutched the sleeves of her tiny blazer, and her breathing was sharp, fast, panicked. Around her, 5 executives stood, frozen suits wrinkled, eyes darting, utterly useless. One security guard, attempting to project authority, shouted, "Back away, she might bite." The words echoed off the marble like a gunshot. Lily flinched. Elijah froze mid-step. Mop paused mid-swipe. He didn't speak, not at first. He simply watched. His heart was pounding, but not with fear, with familiarity. He knew those stimming motions, that overwhelmed look, that desperation for silence in a room full of chaos. He'd seen it before, in his daughter, in the mirror, in the classrooms where he once taught. That's right, before becoming a janitor. Elijah had been a special education teacher for nearly 2 decades. He held a master's degree in child psychology. But school budget cuts and a broken system had sent him into the shadows, first reluctantly, then quietly. But some skills never leave you. And empathy? Empathy sharpens with every indignity endured. "Can I help?" he asked softly. The guard stepped in front of him, an arm raised like a barrier. "You're the night crew. Stay out of this." The last guy who tried to touch her got fired on the spot. Elijah didn't argue. He didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at Lily. Not just looked, saw. And for a split second, her gaze met his. There it was. Recognition. Not of him, but of something deeper. a silent knowing. Elijah didn't need permission. He walked back to his janitor cart, grabbed a small bottle of dish soap, dipped a straw into a bucket of clean water, and sat slowly on the marble floor, exactly 10 feet away from her. Not approaching, not crowding, just sitting. Then he began to blow bubbles, softly, rhythmically, not saying a word. 1, 2, 3. The air began to shimmer with tiny spheres of rainbow light. Lily's swaying slowed, her eyes fixed on the bubbles as they floated upward, spinning gently, never threatening. The boardroom execs watched in dumbfounded silence. And from the glass-walled mezzanine above, another pair of eyes tracked the entire scene, unblinking, calculating, stunned. It was Marissa Chen, billionaire CEO of Halston Pharmaceuticals. World leader, single mother, a woman who had sued and swallowed competitors before her second espresso. But now, watching her daughter actually settle for the first time in years, she couldn't breathe. Because it wasn't the $1,500 hour therapists from Geneva. It wasn't the neurofeedback machines from Silicon Valley. It was a janitor, a black man in scuffed sneakers and a name tag that most of her staff had never even read. When the lobby finally quieted and Lily lay on her side watching one last bubble drift inches from her nose, Elijah slowly stood. He expected the worst, security dragging him out, a pink slip by morning. Instead, he heard a voice, sharp, female, and coming closer. "Mr. Brooks, I need to speak with you now." He turned, and there she was, Marissa Chen, up close. Sharp heels, sharper jawline, power in every movement. And yet something cracked in her tone. Gratitude, wonder, maybe even a hint of shame. Elijah didn't smile. He didn't apologize. He looked down at Lily, still calm, and nodded once. He had no idea that everything was about to change, not just for her, or for him, but for an entire system that didn't know it was broken, yet. When Elijah Brooks followed Marissa Chen into the elevator, the air felt denser than the marble beneath his worn solace. He said nothing, and neither did she. But silence between people like them wasn't emptiness, it was a negotiation. Hers was the silence of someone not used to being challenged. His was the silence of someone who had been dismissed too many times to rush validation. The elevator doors opened into a world far removed from the chaos below. The entire 42nd floor belonged to Marissa. It was less an office and more a private fortress, floor-to-ceiling windows that gazed down on Manhattan. Designer furniture in shades of threat and sophistication, and the kind of soundproofing that muted not just noise but truth. Elijah's sneakers made soft scuffs on a rug that probably cost more than his annual salary. "Sit," Marissa said, gesturing to a sleek leather chair. She remained standing. It was a tactic classic executive positioning. She wanted control. Elijah didn't flinch. "Where did you learn that?" she asked abruptly. "The bubbles, that method." Her voice was sharp, but behind it something raw. "My daughter," Elijah replied simply. "She's autistic." "I learned out of necessity." Marissa blinked, processing. "And your background? Did you take a workshop, a class?" The tone was dismissive, clinical. Elijah let it sit. Then he answered, 17 years as a special education teacher." Master's in child psychology from Howard. Specialized in autism spectrum disorders. Budget cuts closed the school. I took what work I could find. The pause that followed wasn't awkward, it was seismic. Marissa's world, built on resumes and pedigree, didn't have a slot for people like Elijah. Not someone with his past, not in that uniform. You were a teacher, she repeated, as though reciting something from a dream. And now you clean floors? People have to eat, Elijah said calmly. And this system doesn't hire teachers who work with children it doesn't understand. The words hit like soft thunder. Marissa turned toward the window, away from his eyes. You're telling me, she said finally, that you're more qualified than any of the specialists I've hired for Lily? I'm saying I've connected with her in a way they didn't, he answered. Because they saw her as a diagnosis, I saw her as a person. Silence again. But this time it cracked something in her. She turned around slowly. Her voice was different now, Laura, deliberate. I want to hire you as her therapeutic consultant. $15,000 a month. Part-time. Keep your job if you want, but work with her directly. Elijah didn't smile. He didn't lean forward. He just said, Miss Chen, you're not offering me a job. You're trying to solve a moral dilemma with a paycheck. Marissa flinched, not visibly, but Elijah caught it. You judged me, he continued, based on my uniform, based on my skin, based on the fact that I didn't enter this building with a briefcase and jargon. And now you're trying to fix that judgment by writing a check. I'm not prejudiced, she snapped. Then why did you assume I wasn't qualified to help your child? Elijah's tone wasn't angry. It was precise. Why didn't you ask who I was before assuming what I wasn't? She had no answer. For the first time in decades, Marissa Chen, the woman who negotiated billion-dollar mergers before lunch, was silent. Elijah stood. Your daughter doesn't need another professional. She needs a person who sees her. Not the child you want her to become, but the one she already is. What do you propose? She asked, her voice stripped of arrogance. Time, Elijah said. No cameras, no data logs, no performance targets. Just time. And if I'm right, maybe, just maybe, your daughter learns that the world isn't trying to fix her, just trying to meet her. He walked to the door, then paused. And Miss Chen? Next time someone helps your child, maybe ask about their qualifications before assuming they don't exist. The door closed with a soft click, and for once, Marissa didn't call anyone. She didn't check her schedule. She just stood alone in a high-rise fortress and reconsidered everything. 3 days passed before Marissa Chen made the call. It was brief, hesitant, and without preamble. She hasn't spoken. She won't eat. I need your help. Elijah didn't say, I told you so. He didn't revel in vindication. He just sighed, I'll come tomorrow, but I'm not coming alone. When the door to Marissa's penthouse opened the next morning, she expected Elijah. What she didn't expect was the young woman standing beside him, 16 years old. Braided hair, calm posture, eyes that held both fire and compassion. This is my daughter, Jada, Elijah said. She grew up with everything your daughter is navigating now. I thought Lily might benefit from someone closer to her own world. She's a teenager, Marissa noted cautiously. Lily is. 8. Sometimes a few years make the distance feel safer, Elijah replied. Older kids aren't competition. They're guides. Marissa hesitated, then nodded. Inside, Lily was in her usual corner, huddled, small, silent. But when she saw Jada, something shifted. Not recognition, not yet, but curiosity. Jada didn't push. She sat cross-legged on the floor and quietly unpacked a bag of watercolors, textured paper, and colored pencils. She began painting without explanation. No instructions, no expectations. Just presence. After a few minutes, she spoke not to Lily, but to the colors. Blue is when the sky misses the ocean, she whispered. Yellow is when the sun forgets it's burning. Lily's eyes flicked between the brush and the girl. Then, to everyone's shock, she reached for a paintbrush. She dipped it into orange. That's red and yellow dancing, Jada said gently. Lily didn't speak, not yet. But she began to paint, slowly, methodically, like each stroke was a sentence in a language she didn't yet know how to speak. From the hallway, Elijah observed, not just Lily, but Marissa. He noticed how her body leaned forward, how her hand hovered near her chest like it wanted to reach out and didn't know how. For the first time, she wasn't watching her daughter. As a case study, she was watching her as a person. But peace is fragile when you're not used to it. And just as the room settled into a quiet rhythm, the intercom buzzed. Miss Chen, Dr. Devon Hall is here for Lily's scheduled session. Marissa cursed and under her breath. She had forgotten. Again, Dr. Hall was everything Marissa used to trust. Harvard credentials, polished demeanor, fees that required a wire transfer. He entered like he owned the room. Let's assess her current engagement index, he announced, scanning the scene. Who are these people? Dr. Hall, Marissa began. This is Elijah Brooks and his daughter Jada. They've been working with Lily. Hall's eyes narrowed. Working? They're unlicensed. You can't just allow random individuals to engage with a child requiring specialized therapy. Elijah stood, calm, tall, and impossibly unshaken. Dr. Hall, I've read your papers. You've repackaged classroom strategies from the 90s and charged 6 figures for them. Hall scoffed. And what exactly are your credentials? Howard University, Elijah replied. Masters in child psychology. 17 years in special education. Unlike your patients, I worked in systems that couldn't afford to fail kids. The silence tightened. Jada kept painting. Lily too. Miss Chen, Hall said sharply, this is malpractice. If you continue with this charade, I'll have to step away from Lily's care. Marissa glanced at her daughter still painting, still peaceful. That's all right, Dr. Hall, she said. You may go. If you think this is real progress, you're being emotional, he snapped. You'll come running back when it falls apart. Maybe, she said. But I'll take a chance on someone who sees my daughter, not her diagnosis. Hall, left in a cloud of indignation and ego. And the room, once again, was still. Does he always talk like that? Jada asked. Marissa nodded. Most of them do. Certainty is a luxury, Elijah murmured, jotting something in his notebook. Reserved for people who've never had to doubt themselves. And with that, the room breathed again. That evening, after Elijah and Jada left, Marissa didn't pour herself a glass of wine like she usually did. She didn't call her personal chef, didn't review quarterly earnings. She stood in Lily's room, watching the still wet paintings, laid out like new constellations, orange everywhere. She whispered the word to herself over and over, like a fragile spell she didn't want to break. The next morning, she didn't wait for Elijah to call. She sent a car for him. But Elijah didn't just come with paintbrushes and empathy this time. He came with something else, history. After Lily went to bed that evening, Elijah sat across from Marissa at her dining table, dark wood, unscuffed, barely used. "There's something you need to understand," he said, voice low, steady. "This isn't just about Lily. It's about the system you've trusted to care for her." Marissa folded her arms. "Go on." Elijah reached into his satchel and pulled out a thin folder. "I spent the last 4 years working the night shift at Halston. And in that time, I've seen more than anyone ever thought I would. I've listened. I've watched. I've read what your team leaves out on desks and throws into shred bins without thinking." Marissa narrowed her eyes, but said nothing. "Your top-tier therapists," Elijah continued, "they've been billing for sessions they never held, copy-pasting reports, charging 15 grand a visit for recycled care plans. I didn't want to believe it at first, but the pattern was too clear." He opened the folder. Inside were documents, copies of emails, memos, session reports, all dated identically with different names. "You're telling me the people I've trusted with my daughter have been faking it?" she asked, voice flat. "I'm telling you," Elijah said. "They've been selling you expert confidence while failing your daughter and dozens like her." Marissa exhaled sharply. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if we don't expose it now, they'll do it too. The next child, and the next." She stared at the folder, then at him. "You risked your job collecting this." Elijah shrugged. "I risked more staying silent." That night, Marissa reviewed every document, every fake report, every overbilled hour. And the next day, she did something nobody expected. She called a board meeting. The entire executive wing of Halston Pharmaceuticals was summoned. Among them, Dr. Devon Hall and several of his elite colleagues. The room smelled of espresso and fear. "This is about my daughter," Marissa began. "But it's also about your practices and your ethics." She placed the folder on the glass table. "These are copies of reports submitted under your credentials. All templated, all billed at full rate, none tailored to the child." The silence was louder than any accusation. Dr. Hall chuckled dryly. "With respect, Miss Chen, your daughter's emotional volatility is skewing your judgment." "You're dismissed," she said calmly, "effective immediately. Your contract is void, and a full review of your past claims is being submitted to the licensing board." The room shifted. The arrogance cracked. As they left one by one, some red-faced, some already on the phone with lawyers, Marissa remained seated. Beside her sat Elijah, quiet, poised, unmoved. "I want to build something new," she said. "Something that actually works. Not just for Lily, for every family that can't afford to pay for lies." Elijah nodded. "Then we do it your way, but on my terms. No more ivory towers. No more gatekeeping care behind price tags. Deal," Marissa said. "Where do we begin?" "We begin," Elijah said, by teaching people that love isn't soft, it's strategic. And that was the first spark. By the end of that week, word had leaked. First within Halston Pharmaceuticals, then across LinkedIn threads, parenting forums, and finally national news. A billionaire CEO had fired her entire elite pediatric therapy team. Not because of scandalous tweets, not because of a corporate merger, but because a janitor with a master's degree in child psychology had exposed a web of quiet, profitable negligence. The headlines didn't know what to do with the story. From mop to mentor, some read. The janitor who knew more than the experts. But Elijah Brooks didn't care about the headlines. He cared about the next step. The Ward Brooks Initiative, as it would come to be known, was launched quietly, without PR campaigns or ribbon cuttings. It started in a single room once, a conference space on the 12th floor, now converted into a therapy pilot lab. No one wore lab coats. There were no clipboards or artificial smiles. The children who entered were greeted by paintbrushes, sand, tables, music rooms, therapy animals, and language cards in 12 dialects. One wall was covered in mirrors, not for vanity, but for eye-tracking observation. Another was blank, so the children could claim it with color. And at the heart of the room, bubbles. Always bubbles. Jada became a bridge, moving between kids and staff, helping build trust the way only someone who'd lived it could. Elijah designed the programs. He built a team: former teachers, parents of neurodiverse kids, retired speech therapists, and even a few reformed clinicians who had grown disillusioned by the standard model. And Marissa? She funded it all without question. But more than her money, she offered her humility. She let the work lead her. For the first time in years, she was a student again. One afternoon, a mother arrived with her son, 4 years old, nonverbal, labeled unreachable by his previous school. He was shaking as he entered, tears silently streaming down his cheeks. Elijah crouched beside him and simply blew one soft bubble into the air. The boy reached for it and smiled. That smile became the first image on the website. Media outlets finally caught up. The story exploded. Elijah gave his first interview, seated beside Marissa and Jada. When asked how it felt to go from janitor to program director, he said, "I never stopped being who I was. I just waited for the world to stop ignoring it." But not everyone celebrated. Dr. Devenhall and his former colleagues went on the offensive, accusing Elijah of fraud, of leveraging sympathy over science. They questioned his credentials, challenged his methods, tried to discredit the initiative. That's when Elijah released the real data collected ethically, transparently, and in collaboration with child development researchers at NYU and Howard. Emotional regulation scores, expressive vocabulary improvements, behavioral breakthroughs. In months, the studies were peer-reviewed, published, presented, and eventually, respected. Devenhall's counter-arguments crumbled under the weight of their own cynicism. His license was suspended for falsified billing. He left the state. Quietly. As for Elijah, he never returned to mopping floors. But he never forgot them either. He kept his old work badge, framed, next to a single sentence. "They said I was just the help. I helped." By spring of the following year, what began as a quiet makeshift pilot program had grown into something no one could ignore. The Ward Brooks Initiative opened its second center in Baltimore, then Atlanta, then Oakland. The model wasn't revolutionary because it was loud or expensive. It was revolutionary because it returned to something forgotten: listening. Every classroom was designed from the child's perspective: low shelves, flexible lighting, sensory zones. There were no cubicles, no harsh bells, no grading rubrics. Instead, children were met where they were. And from there, they rose. Jada, once a teenager with anxiety about speaking in public, became the face of their youth advocacy campaign. Her TED-style talk, "Speak Gently to the Ones Who've Been Told to Be Quiet," went viral. She shared how she had once melted down in a grocery store only to hear a stranger call her spoiled. How it was her father, not professionals, who showed her how to speak the language of her own mind. Millions watched. Parents wept. Teachers wrote in. Kids emailed saying, "You made me feel normal." And Elijah? He smiled through it all, but remained grounded. He knew this wasn't about fame. This was about erasing barriers for children who'd been written off by systems that never learned how to translate silence. Marissa Chen's transformation was equally profound. She stepped down as CEO permanently, devoting her full energy to the foundation. Reporters tried to brand it as a redemption arc. "Billionaire gives back after hiring Janitor," they wrote. But Marissa corrected them. "I didn't hire Elijah Brooks to fix my daughter. I listened to him and began fixing myself." That quote lived on magazine covers for weeks. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Hall, once the untouchable pillar of institutional authority, found himself unemployable. No private practice would take him. His speaking invitations dried up. He briefly ran a blog accusing the initiative of being emotion-driven propaganda. No one read it. Eventually, he rebranded as a wellness consultant, offering services no one requested. One day, Marissa received an email from him, curt, bitter, a last-ditch plea for forgiveness. She forwarded it to Elijah, who read it once and deleted it. "Forgiveness," he once told Jada, "doesn't mean letting them back in. It means letting go of who they thought you were." And still, the work expanded. One morning, a little girl named Mia came to the Chicago Center. She hadn't spoken in months. She only drew spirals and cried when touched. By her third week, she painted a picture: two stick figures, one holding bubbles. She didn't say a word. But on the bottom corner, she'd written, "I feel safe here." That was enough. Universities reached out. Government agencies began discussions about national integration of Elijah's methodologies. Funding offers came pouring in. But Elijah set boundaries. "If we have to water this down for money, we don't want your money." Integrity over expansion, always. 1 year after Lily first met Elijah, she stood in front of a small group of parents and therapists and read a poem she wrote with Jada's help. She titled it, "Orange is a Safe Color." She read every line in her quiet voice. At the end, she looked at her mom, then at Elijah. "Thank you," she said. The room wept. And Elijah? He just sat in the back, hands clasped, eyes full but steady. He wasn't interested in being a symbol. He was interested in being of service. Because in a world that labels people by title, status, or noise, Elijah had rewritten the rules by seeing what others missed, by hearing what others ignored, and by reaching those no one else dared to try for. 12 months after Elijah Brooks first blew soap bubbles across the marble lobby of Halston Pharmaceuticals, the world looked different, not just for Lily or Marissa or even Elijah himself, but for every child whose silence had been mistaken for disobedience, and every adult whose worth had been measured by the cost of their clothing rather than the depth of their heart. The Ward Brooks Initiative was no longer a pilot. It was a movement. It had redefined what care looked like, what dignity meant in therapeutic settings, and who society allowed to lead. At the heart of it all was still one principle: empathy is not an accessory. It is the architecture. Elijah, now 43, still refused to upgrade his car. He still took the subway sometimes. He still returned to that original marble lobby once a month, not as a janitor, but as a reminder. He'd pause in the corner where Lily once sat in crisis. He'd stand silently, watching the air, recalling the exact arc of those first bubbles. Then he'd whisper, "It started here." Jada had been accepted to Columbia. Full ride, majoring in child development and public policy. Her essay was titled, "I Learned to Speak Because My Father Never Stopped Listening." It was published in 3 journals before she even finished her first semester. Marissa, too, had evolved beyond expectation. She traveled the country with Elijah, not as a patron, but as a student. Every conference they spoke at, she began by telling the story not of her daughter's diagnosis, but of her own awakening. "I once believed the most expensive care was the best care," she'd say, "until a man with a mop taught me that the rarest thing in any institution is someone who sees what no one else does." Meanwhile, families kept arriving. They came from farms, from cities, from border towns and refugee camps. They came carrying reports full of red flags and hopeless prognosis. And they left carrying something else: a plan, a strategy, and most important of all, hope. One morning, the initiative received a letter from the Office of the U.S. Surgeon General. It announced that a nationwide task force on neurodiversity inclusion would be co-chaired by 2 civilian leaders. One was Dr. Lena Petrovsky, a longtime autism researcher from Boston. The other was Elijah Brooks. When he got the call, Elijah was in the break room, showing a boy how to blow bubbles using a slotted spoon. He thanked them, then asked, "Can I bring my daughter on stage with me?" At the press conference months later, with cameras rolling and reporters flashing, Elijah didn't wear a suit. He wore a simple dark jacket, no tie. His original janitor name badge pinned over his chest. "People ask me how I got here," he said, standing at the podium. "The answer is, I didn't rise. The world just finally stopped pushing me down." He turned, lifted Jada's hand, and together they held the certificate of appointment. The applause was thunderous. As the event ended and the room emptied, Elijah walked out last. As he reached the double doors, he felt a tug at his sleeve. A boy, maybe 7 years old, looking up with wide eyes. "Are you the bubble man?" the boy asked. Elijah smiled, knelt down, and said, "Sometimes." And he reached into his pocket and handed the boy a small, travel-sized bottle of soap bubbles. "Start here," he whispered. "It's enough." And in that moment, in a world obsessed with titles, degrees, and empty noise, one boy held the beginning of a new language in the palm of his hand. A language made of stillness, trust, and tiny shimmering spheres that told the truth in silence, because sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't begin with fire. They begin with a breath and a bubble. Never overlook the quiet ones. Never underestimate those who serve in silence. True authority comes not from titles, but from understanding. And healing begins not with instruction, but with connection. In a society built on noise, the ones who truly listen hold the keys to change.